This is So Life Wants You Dead, a show that explores the intersection of illness, disability, healing, and creativity. I had an emergency organ transplant in 2015, and despite the drama of the situation, it turned out that near death was fertile ground for my creative life. Now, all these years later, I can say that was what saved me. That and a brand new liver. I'm Nora Logan, and this is a podcast on how looking at death helps you live. Today, my guest is Harshada David Wagner. Harshada is a master meditation instructor, author, artist, dad, and wisdom teacher with more than 25 years of teaching experience. Classically trained in the wisdom traditions of yoga, bhakti, Vedanta, and Tantra, his teachings come from his decades of working with people, helping them to learn to live more fulfilling, soul-centered, purpose-driven lives. On today's episode, we talk about his experience with ulcerative colitis, his initial denial and resistance to Western medicine, and the interplay between Western and Eastern medicine in approaching his care. He talks about how his life, art, and teaching have been shaped by his illness, the role grace plays in near death, and the yogic view on illness. The thing I love about speaking to Harshada about anything is that he approaches everything he does with both a sense of deep devotion and a wicked sense of humor. Here's the conversation. Welcome to the show, Harshada. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So this is a new experience for the show and for me because I usually interview people who have spoken publicly about their illness or have made art about it, or both. And in this instance, though you have written about it publicly, I really don't know that much about how you came to be ill and what subsequently happened. I know you were 29 when you had a massive surgery, which saved your life, but beyond that, I don't know many details. Can you tell me about how you got sick and also when, and just a little bit of the background of it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I must have been around 26 when I started having these gastrointestinal symptoms that weren't sort of normal things. Like I had traveled to India, I did some of my training in India, but it wasn't like that. And I started basically like having like bloody stool. And that would kind of come and go. And sometimes it would get really bad and then it would subside. And that lasted for a couple of years. And also, I should just say, I don't think I've like told this story. I don't know. I haven't had to tell it.
Yeah.
So like, also it's funny for me. This is like a very fresh telling of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I feel very honored that you're sharing.
Usually I sort of like, if I tell anything, I just sort of like jump to the big moments.
Yeah.
So it's good to think back. And then at some point around 27, 28, I got sick enough that I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And different kind, which is a form of inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, along with Crohn's disease. That's the other really known one. And it's something that kind of runs in my family. It seems like my maternal grandfather had something like that. Both of my brothers have something like that. Both of my living brothers. I have one brother that is dead, but never so bad that anybody ever had to be hospitalized. So I was hospitalized the first time, it would have been around 27, 28, something like that. And, you know, they managed it with medication, including steroids. And then it just kind of subsided. And you have to understand, at this time, I was like living in an ashram. I was like a full-time spiritual student and, you know, working in the ashram as a junior teacher, and both in India and upstate New York. And I was heavily invested in Eastern medicine, alternative medicine, And I was very resistant to the idea of going to a hospital or being treated by a Western doctor or being on medication. And I was convinced that if I could just talk to the right person that would give me the right diet or the right herbs or the right whatever spiritual adjustment or whatever it was, because no way do these doctors know what they're talking about. And the doctors just said, you have this thing, ulcerative colitis. And they told me the first time I was hospitalized, honestly, you should probably have your colon removed.
Wow.
And I was like, no fucking way. I was like, I remember I said, I'd rather go to South America and like find a shaman to heal me rather than to let you cut my body. I mean, I was like very vehement and very arrogant also. Anyway.
And 27.
And 27. Yes. Yes.
Being told that you need your colon basically cut out when you're 27 is a huge shock to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was like newly engaged. I was, like when I say that I was living in an ashram, it was kind of like I had my dream job. It was like, for my world, it was the equivalent of someone who like studied business and got an internship at like Goldman Sachs or something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was on my way.
Yeah. You were at the best of the best type of thing.
Yeah. And I was like, like this up and coming person in that world. And, had this cool fiance and who happened to be a doctor also. And all of a sudden there's this huge interruption. And at that point it went away. It went into remission and I didn't have to continue taking medication as I remember. And then it would flare up and come back. And the next time it came back, I was still in that organization, but I had gone to Oakland, California to set up. Our guru was going to be traveling to Oakland and to the West Coast to be on tour. So I was doing advanced work and I got a horrible resurgence of it. And, what it is like is it's like having bloody, painful diarrhea, painful like in your belly, like unspeakably painful and a lot of bleeding. And it also creates a kind of an insanity. When you're really sick anyway, it affects not just your body, but your mind as well. And I think that when you're bleeding so much, that is also part of it. But I was like in intense denial. I did not want to be sick. I did not want to miss out on this life that I was setting up for myself. And I'll tell a story. It's pretty graphic, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
So our ashram there is in Oakland, which is the East Bay. So the Bay Area has the East Bay, which is like Oakland, and then Berkeley and so on. And then San Francisco is on the other side of the bay. So I had a gig for the ashram in San Francisco teaching, and I was so sick. But I did it anyway. And the only car that was available to use from like the ashram motor pool was a stick shift Volkswagen Jetta. And I had never really driven in San Francisco at all. And I hadn't driven stick shift that much. Mm-hmm. And if you've been to San Francisco, the streets are very, very hilly. Yeah. And I was so sick and I kind of managed and I got to the gig. And a couple of times while I was teaching in the gig, I had to go to the bathroom and just like hemorrhage blood into the toilet. And I get back, I'm done. I get back in the car. I managed to get through the hills again and I go over the bridge and I really have to like go to the toilet, but there's like no place to stop. So I'm trying to get back to the ashram. So I rush back to the ashram, park the car, get into just like the lobby, like the public lobby. And there's like, public bathrooms there for where we had programs. And I remember like, I just got to the stall and before I could even like take my pants off, I just shit my pants but it was just like blood. It was like a horror movie, and almost passed out. I had to like hold the sides of the stalls to keep from fainting. So that was the state I was in of both sickness, but also denial. And I had a friend there. He was this older devotee who was a paramedic and kind of crazy. And I was going to I should also say, during this time, I'm in the East Bay. So I'm going to like the best acupuncturists and herbalists. And they're telling me, oh yes, you just have this slippery chi, and you just take these herbs and you're going to be okay.
You'll be fine.
Yeah. Just eat this and take these herbs and you'll be fine. I went to this other guy who is like a voodoo chiropractor. You know how there are these like, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like they're like chiropractic, that's their qualification, but then they do all this other stuff. And also, I don't mean to like offend anyone's belief systems about alternative medicine, but I'm going to throw some shade here.
Go for it.
Okay. So this is a guy who did like, his shtick was, and like everybody swore by him. Like he was just like the best guy. And he was like $300 an hour, which in those days was like a lot of money. Didn't take insurance, so on, but like
still a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you're having to see someone weekly.
Yeah. So I was going to see this guy at least weekly, and he would do these like weird little adjustments. And then he had this rack on his wall of all these empty vials that were supposed to be, you know how like homeopathic is like the essence of something? It's just like the trace essence. Well, this was like the trace essence of homeopathy, that to the point that you couldn't even see it with the human eye. They were just empty little bottles.
Mm-hmm.
And he would hold the bottle in one hand and then like touch me and like do this like muscle testing thing on me. And I wouldn't even have to take anything. It was just by him holding it in his hand, he was somehow transferring the medicine of the thing. And he had put me on chlorophyll and told me that I had a milk allergy and all this. And he was just saying, you're definitely getting better. And by this point, I'm getting so skinny and so crazy too. And I had decided that like I didn't want to take, and all of these people were saying, don't take medication. The doctors are giving you medication that's making you sicker.
Mm.
So don't take steroids, especially because those are heating and you have this heat disorder and all this. So I was like, okay, I'm not taking any medication. I'm all in on this program, but I need to eat meat, and I can't eat meat in the ashram. So this older paramedic fellow, he would let me come to his apartment and cook like chicken soup and all these things that in my mind, that's what I really needed.
So you needed to eat, they were telling you needed to eat meat to heal.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I also just intuited that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I don't even remember where I fainted. I fainted somewhere. Maybe it was at Pranava's house. That guy's name was Pranava. All I know is that Pranava rushed me to the ER. And he was like this big, bear of a guy. And I remember him just kind of like almost carrying me in and being like, somebody needs to see him right away. He's fainting. He's passing out. He's hemorrhaging blood. And they brought me in and they tested my hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is supposed to be, all these numbers might be wrong also, by the way, but as I recall, I know that it was like half. So if like your hemoglobin is supposed to be like 14, mine was like 6.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me like an immediate blood transfusion. Like I was bleeding to death.
Wow.
And admitted me immediately. That day I had seen the voodoo chiropractor that morning. And he like told me, oh, you're going to be better, so on and so on. So they admitted me for that hospitalization, and they threw all these different things at me. They didn't do surgery. They said that they probably should, and I absolutely refused. And then it went into remission again on medication. at some point I moved to New Zealand because basically I was so sick I couldn't really go back to the ashram, and I was getting married anyway. And when I was in New Zealand, I had another period of remission and then a huge relapse. And I got so sick, I was like concentration camp skinny, and they did an emergency colectomy. So they removed my whole large intestine and gave me an ileostomy at that point. And I can tell you more about that in a second. About 7 years later, they did another big surgery to kind of make the ileostomy permanent and also take out the last chunk of my small intestine that they left in case I wanted to do this other surgery that if you want me to, I can tell you about. But
Can you explain what an ileostomy is?
Yeah. And also I should just say, ever since that surgery, I've been in excellent health with like absolutely no issues whatsoever.
That's great.
Yeah. So an ileostomy, ostomy means something is outside of your body, and ile is short for ileum. So an ileostomy is where a part of your ileum comes outside of your body, and then you're fitted with like a removable pouch that collects the digested food. So instead of going to the toilet normally, anally, the digested food only goes so far because it only goes through my small intestine and then comes into the ileostomy appliance.
And that's a stoma bag, right? That's what they refer to as a stoma bag?
Yeah, the stoma is the part that comes out of the body. It's the part of the ileum that kind of sticks out.
Wow, a big story.
Yeah.
That I've never heard before.
I don't know if anybody's still listening at this point. But.
Well, I'm struck really by I've had, in my own experience, I had the denial, and I was very similar age to you as well. And also very focused on my career, didn't want anything to change. And I had people wanting to prescribe me herbs in the hospital. I had healers coming in and that sort of thing. And there came a point where I had to go to Western medicine. And mine was a very short period of time. But I think the way you describe it in your story is a good point and an interesting one to think about, because there is, and subsequently for me in my own recovery, I've had to find the balance and kind of take what I like and leave the rest from Eastern medicine or different types of healers.
Yeah.
I never went to a voodoo chiropractor, but that sort of thing. And then also deal with my own resentment sometimes that I have of Western medicine, but also really acknowledge how they saved my life.
Absolutely.
How was that for you?
Yeah.
That kind of balancing that?
Yeah. And I mean, there were so many other healers and stuff that I didn't even mention in the short story, but there were a lot. I mean, when I was in the hospital, not the surgery time, but the other time in Berkeley, and our guru's tour was there. And so like everyone was coming to see me. Like everyone was coming, trying to help me.
Yeah.
And I had people doing Reiki on me and so many things. And the final one that kind of like woke me up was these people came and they said, okay, well, you have parasites. And I said, well, they checked me for parasites. And they said, no, you can't detect these parasites. And I said, well, how do you know I had them? And they had like muscle tested themselves about my parasites or something. So they knew. I'm very skeptical about muscle. As soon as somebody starts doing muscle testing, I'm sorry. God bless you, muscle testers. But I have trauma. And they said, no, come to our clinic. We have a clinic in Tijuana because what we do is illegal in the U.S. But come to our clinic, and first thing you need to do is have all your teeth removed.
No.
Because you have these bacteria in your teeth that are causing all this, and if you don't do it, it's going to eventually give you cancer. And the guy had all of his teeth out and like showed me that his teeth were dentures.
Wow.
Young guy. And then they do this whole regimen where they like you wash your mouth out with like a bleach solution, and you wash your food in like hydrogen peroxide, And then they give you these electric shocks from a car battery. Now, I shit you not, from a car battery to like kill the parasites in your system.
Where did they attach it to?
You hold, I don't know. I think you hold the electrodes in your hand or something. Yeah. And so when they told me that, and they were just saying, yeah, there's parasites. And if you go to any restaurant, you're going to get parasites, any restaurant. And I was like, maybe you're right. But if you're right, I want to be wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember my doctor at the time, he just came and he just sat down and he said, look, he said, you're a good person. This is not your fault. This is something in your DNA. I'm so glad I'm remembering this. And he said, you live your whole life trying to be a conscious person. And this is not your fault. He's like, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take your medication. You're going to be better and you're going to live your life. And I was like, I got this like huge relief. I don't remember exactly what the question was, but it was about like how I relate to Eastern medicine, that kind of thing now. Yeah. What I found is that, Western medicine is like super limited, and they're also kind of honest about that. Whereas Eastern medicine is also very limited, but there's actually this kind of arrogance about it. The other thing is that Eastern medicine is almost always, at least here, practiced by entrepreneurs. So if you go to a Western doctor and they don't find anything wrong with you, they're so happy to send you away without treating you. You'll never go to an Eastern person and have them send you away and say, actually, you're fine. Drink more water.
Yeah.
They'll be like, oh, no, you need to like come every week and get acupuncture and a colonic and, here's some eye drops. You could do all these things because they need the business. I don't mean to be so cynical. But the other piece is with that is that most of us are imbalanced, and living in the modern world, all this stuff that Eastern medicine offers does help us to find balance. It does help us to like take care of ourselves in a much deeper way. But what else? Also, I should say that when I finally had the surgery, it was in New Zealand. It wasn't here. And they have socialized medicine there. And the doctors and the surgeons and everything were so much better and so great. And I mean, it was like kind of jankier, I have a huge scar instead of like a laparoscopic thing, but they were so much better. But what I will say to people out there, because I imagine you probably have people that are in these situations listening, is like almost every Eastern alternative person will also say that they can help you. It's very rare that they'll say, I don't know what to do. So if they say, I can't help you, ask them, have you helped someone with this specific thing before, as severe as I have it? That was the question that I didn't think to ask.
That's such a good question. Yeah. Why do you think to ask that in that moment? Yeah.
And I remember when I went into the hospital that time in Berkeley, I remember I called the Chinese doctor guy and told him, like I had to cancel an appointment or something. And he was like, well, I'm very sorry to hear that. Like he was disappointed in me that I went to the hospital. Like he like shamed me for like giving in and going to the hospital.
Yeah. And thank God for that doctor who gave you that relief to tell you that it wasn't your fault. Because there is, I think it can happen that people get shamed for not doing enough, for not being quote unquote healthy enough when it's something that's in your DNA.
Yeah.
Speaking of your surgery, actually, you wrote a piece about your experience of surgery last year, and I was wondering, would you read it for us?
Sure. It was July 11th in the year 2000. I had just turned 29, and I was waking up in a hospital room. The night before, during the full moon eclipse of Guru Purnima, I had gone through a massive surgery to save my life. I was close to death before the surgery, wasted, skinny, nearly bleeding to death from my gut. The morning after the operation, I was in a lot of pain. I barely weighed 120 pounds. I was stoned out of my mind on morphine, and I was clear, so clear that the only thing real was grace. The night before, I had to undergo a big abdominal surgery, and in the process of shifting me from the operation theater to the recovery room, my epidural came out. So when I came out, that's the anesthetic. So when I came out of the general anesthetic in the middle of the night, I had no other pain relief. My whole belly had been cut open and stitched back again, from my sternum to my pubic bone. The pain was undescribable. By the time I was awake the next day, I had been reborn. The operation did save my life, so I was better in that regard. But there was something about that night of pain. There was something about coming so close to the brink, something about the sacrifice of having the surgery, the scars and permanent change of my body, the defeat of my ego. I never wanted to have the surgery. I thought I could cure my disease with yoga and Ayurveda alone. Something about going through all of that horror showed me what really mattered. And what mattered was my connection to Source. What mattered was my knowledge that I wasn't just the body, and that what I truly was the divine and imperishable. And I was deeply good. I woke up so grateful to my guru and everything she had taught me. I had been to the other side and saw what was behind the veil. Are you sure I wrote this? I don't remember. It's really much better than anything I've ever written.
It's great. Thank you for reading it. Unless it was just someone impersonating you.
Yeah. Where did you find this?
On your Instagram.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I can really identify with the pain that I experienced after surgery, having similar sleepless nights. And the experience of being in hospital really creating a sort of awakening for me. And I'm curious, what was it about that night of pain and the seeing behind the veil that connected you more deeply to Source and to God?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, there's something about grace and a moment of blessing like that that is just, it's beyond our ability to comprehend or say what it was exactly.
And just to say, when I was actually putting that question together, I was like, I don't know if he's going to have words for that.
Yeah.
Because I certainly don't always have words for it. And then I also have many words for it, you know?
Yeah, I think that it was like what I said here. I mean, part of it was like going through my worst fears in many ways, you know, because it's like I never wanted to have that surgery. I never wanted to end up with an ileostomy. It was just a horrifying thought to me. But I also didn't want to fail. It felt like failing. So going through all of that, but then, you know, then you go into the surgery and you're like, okay, I accept I have to do this, but just like, let it be okay. And then it got botched. I mean, I was writing about it very politely here, but they fucked it up. And I was like screaming in the hospital room like all night. It was really, really, like if it was in the US, it would have been a huge lawsuit. And that's the other side of socialized medicine. They're just like, sorry, mate. You know, like,
good luck to you.
Yeah, good luck to you. Exactly.
Do you have a bike to get home?
Yeah. But, you know, it was all of that. And I think it was just facing all of that and getting to the other side of it. Yeah. That surgeon also had one of those angel messages. He was this guy, Professor Perry. And in that system, the surgeons are called doctors. They're called professors. And Professor Perry said, look, write this year off. This is like some of the best advice for people that get surgery. He said, write this year off. This year's just going to be about recovering from this. Like, don't even have any other hopes, or I don't remember how he said it, but he said, write this year off. And then after that, you can just live your life. But for this year, just write it off. And that was so good as far as the advice went.
Did you adapt to that quickly? Because you were 29 when this happened.
Yeah, I think so. I was like newly married, and I mean, this was my Saturn return. I mean, the other thing I didn't put in here is that it was exact the day of the first part of my Saturn return was exact on the day of the surgery, which was also a full moon. And it was also an eclipse. So it was like, and I think your surgery was on your Saturn return too.
Yeah, right. Like smack bang right in the middle of my Saturn return.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I wasn't really aware of the Lionsgate thing back then. It wasn't as sort of prolific as it seems to be now.
Yeah.
But this year, my anniversary is on the 7th, the 6th, it's the 6th into the 7th of August.
Wow.
And, we just had the Lionsgate last week, and I had a second surgery on the 12th, and I was really fucked up in that sort of period of time. And I remember also, actually, I think that there was like a full moon around that time too. Anyway, very similar when I was reading this, rereading it this week, preparing for this interview. Yeah. I couldn't believe the similarities and the timing of it. And also people's Saturn returns are a doozy many times. But I guess in this incarnation of our bodies, it was particularly violent in some ways.
Yeah. And physical and like direct and and then our bodies were different after that.
And having to figure out how to then sort of live a different type of existence.
Yeah.
So I want to shift because you're a visual artist, writer, and spiritual teacher. And I'm curious about how that experience of not only being in the hospital, but having your body shift so radically. And also you were already teaching at that time and you had already gone to art school. You already wanted to be an artist. How did it inform both your teaching and your art practice? And if it did, how did it?
Yeah. I mean, I think just the teaching in the sense that, it was in that hospitalization in New Zealand when I had the big first surgery that I was already a teacher and I think that it was already my vocation, but I remember I got an even stronger vocation while I was there. In New Zealand, they just have you like in these wards. You don't get your own room unless you're like going to die. That's the only time you get your own room.
That's how it is in the UK too.
Yeah. And I remember I was like, I saw there were some single rooms. Is it possible to get there? And they're like, no.
Absolutely not.
No. And the guy in the bed next to me died while I was there. And there was just a curtain between us. And I had made friends with him and had this really profound experience of him leaving his body. Yeah, it was a powerful time of really getting clear about my vocation as a teacher. As a visual artist, that came a little bit later, but, like so much of my visual art has a kind of a quality to it of, like I do a lot of stitching, tearing the canvases and stitching them and sewing pieces on. And there definitely is a sort of like scarred, sewn up, Torn and Mended was the name of one of my shows. And that's the name of my art Instagram. So I think that there is something about that like, it's like the idea of kintsugi pottery, where the Japanese art form where they take broken pottery and then fix it with this lacquer that has gold dust in it. So you can see the golden cracks once it's fixed, or boro, repairing clothing with patches over time. And I mean, that's my artistic inspiration forever. And I'm sure I've thought of it before, but right now as I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally what I am. I don't know how much I had thought about that before this moment, but it's like my body for sure.
Yeah, I had read something you wrote about kintsugi pottery and how it's infused with gold and glue. And I've always found the concept really extraordinary because I find that the Japanese really have a talent for making delicate things so beautiful. And I love just this real commitment to how beautiful broken things can be. And I see that in your art. I'm really taken by it. You make these really large scale pieces with stitching and you use a lot of reds and yellows and oranges. And my next question really was whether it was conscious for you, because they do sort of look, some of the pieces like these patchwork quilts on canvas.
Yeah, definitely it was conscious in the sense of it being related to kintsugi, but also boro. Boro is boro. That's the textile version of it, where you see the like beautiful kimonos with so much patchwork and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a conscious influence. There's also, you wouldn't necessarily know this, but there's also, I use a lot of earth pigments. And consciously as, so if you take something like clay or even take something like soil or rust, or even I use cow dung sometimes, like dried cow dung. It's like these things are like blood of the earth. They're like extracted from the earth, and they're so full of like mineral. I mean, many paints are that too. Many pigments are that as well. But I'll just use like straight clay mixed with acrylic medium or, cow dung or gold also, gold leaf. And that's part of it. And you're just bringing my attention now to just thinking about how it also does relate to the body and having been torn open and bled and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah,
for sure.
Your own brokenness, but infusing it into something really beautiful.
I thought of it more as like an existential, spiritual kind of brokenness and repair. But yeah, for sure, it applies to the physical thing too. The physical thing. That's the thing. I don't think about it that much. I just feel like I had to think about it so much during this period of my life. And now I just don't even think about it too much because I don't have to.
Yeah.
Unless I have to like take my shirt off in front of people, or that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have that too. I had someone on the show recently where we talked about, just as it relates to disclosure and how wearing a bikini, for example, it's a choice that you have to make when you have things going on with your body.
Yeah.
And it can feel confronting.
Yeah.
How is it for you?
Yeah, I go to spas a lot and, sometimes ones that are naked spas. And I always I don't care about people seeing my dick. I don't, but like the ileostomy pouch is just like, I do feel very self-conscious of it. So I always have like a towel that I hold over it, like that sort of thing. Yeah, I am self-conscious about it. And like with lovers, it's like a big intimacy threshold, at the point where it seems like that's going to have to be shown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have a piece called The Power of Forgiveness, which I feel like what you're just speaking about it's a perfect segue into thinking about forgiving the body. And it's a painting that combines dyed canvas with raw painted canvas mixed with cotton, paint, and fabric. And in 2023, you wrote about the piece, "Forgiveness has both repair and also the acceptance and embracing of that which cannot be repaired. It is both harmonious for unions and melding, and also ones that clash and rub and require true compassion, learning, surrender, and unconditional acceptance." And looking at this piece, I was really thinking about forgiveness as it relates to our own bodies and that which cannot be repaired. And really just thinking what you were just saying about your stoma bag and how you move with it through the world. How do you reckon with forgiving your own body when shame also was piled on you in your 20s, in your own life and body?
That's a good question. Just mostly through denial, I think. Just like avoidance and denial, mostly. I mean,
I
that's the
love
truth.
those for myself too.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't have to think about it, I just really don't. And then whenever I am confronted with it or do have to think about it, I just immediately try to get to a different topic in my mind, I think.
Mm-hmm. Like if someone brings it up, or if, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had some body work done the other day, and that's a moment where a lot of times I'll just tell a new body worker, hey, I have this thing, don't worry about it, I'm fine. But just so that there isn't that moment where you flip over and they're like, whoa. And this particular body worker not only was cool with it, but she actually worked on my abdomen, and which is unusual for body workers, in my experience anyway. And she really worked all around where the ostomy appliances and like worked into my scar and everything too. And it was really beautiful. And it felt so healing and so loving. And I really needed that. And I haven't really had much of that.
Yeah. I've only had it a couple of times that people, I want to say that they've been brave enough to go into my scar and really touch it, because I don't know how much training body workers necessarily have with dealing with scars.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it can be scary for them to touch.
Yeah.
But when they have, there's so much held there, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy you had that experience.
Yeah. I had this other cool thing happen a couple of weeks ago where Adriana, that's my partner, and we did this fire ceremony online, and the fire was very hot. And so I took my shirt off, and as I think I was just sitting very close to the fire, and the fire was so hot that I got burned. Like my skin got burned. My whole kind of chest and belly was red, but my scar, I guess because the skin was different or something, it actually blistered. Wow. All the way along the scar that was exposed. It was fully blistered, like 2nd-degree burn. And then it healed, and the scar almost completely went away. It's like almost gone.
Whoa.
Where that happened. Before it was red, and now it's like not at all.
Whoa.
So it was like weird, almost like minor miracle status.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Very mystical.
Yeah.
You're also a dad. You have 2 kids. And I'm curious if there's been an experience for you of how you parent, having had the experience of near death, but also having a stoma bag and moving through the world in the way that you do. Whether it's being so close to death has informed how you parent, but also has it created any limitations for you as a parent?
No, not too much. I mean, like the physical aspect of it, it's not. I've been living with it for so long. It's like not a big deal. Sometimes I think it must be weird. Maybe it's weird for them, but they don't have any other dad to compare it to. So, but the other piece of it that you said, yeah, I mean, so many of the blessings in my life, because there's a period where it's like you get to that point, and it's not just that you're sick, but you just feel like maybe your life is over. Or like it's never going to be good again. You know how you have people have this sense of false permanence when they're in pain. It's like the pain there's an illusion that it goes on forever. And I'll oftentimes just sort of try to wake up in a moment and be like, look at you. Like you didn't even think that you were going to survive. Or like, look at this. You have a family. Look at these beautiful kids. And so in that sense, for sure.
It's really fun to speak to you about this because of how long it's been since you had your experience of illness, and thinking about not only my own life, but I imagine my listeners' lives who knows what phase of their own illness they might be on, whether they're ill or not, and to have it kind of so far in the rear view and understand that in those deep moments of pain that you really don't have any conception of how it could be different, and that it does change. Like for myself, I just celebrated 9 years of my transplant, and I couldn't have imagined how different my life would be. It didn't feel like it would ever change.
Yeah.
And I think it's just it's so good to have examples of continuing to live when you've had such immense pain. And there is so much immense pain in the world, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
But it's fun to speak to you about how different things have gotten for you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so grateful. And it's, whatever the moment is that someone is living through, I mean, it just sounds like such a trite thing to say, but tomorrow will bring something different. And if not tomorrow, then the day after tomorrow, or the year after this one, or, the important thing, I think, is when you're faced with some kind of a big limitation, especially like a big physical challenge, like an illness or a surgery or an amputation or a paralysis, it really forces you to consider what's important to you. And it's like, what is the bottom line that you have to get out of this life? Even if you're, sometimes the limitation is in time. People have a diagnosis where they just don't have much time. And it forces us to think about, what is really important, and also in contrast, what is not.
Did you have to grieve who you were? Did you go through a process of grief around that?
Very quickly. It was very short in my case, around the surgery. But I've had that experience that you're asking many times over about other things, about, because I've had like so many in this one lifetime, so many really different incarnations in grieving, for sure.
I was also curious because you were also already sober at the time you got sick. And I was curious if there was any part of you that kind of felt hard done by for you, like did this thing, you got sober, and then you had this really intense physical illness.
No, because
what
the thing is like
about?
When somebody has to get, I was just laughing because I was just thinking, damn, I have a lot of stuff. So many things. It makes me feel like I'm very unself-conscious, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't remember the things that I've written after I write them. I don't remember, like even that painting. That painting is as big as a building. And I just didn't even remember that I'd even made it until you told me that thing. And I also have a guided meditation called The Power of Forgiveness. So when you said you made The Power of Forgiveness, I wasn't sure what you were talking about until you read that thing. And anyway.
And his paintings are massive. I'll put them up on the website so people can see. They really are these mammoth creations. So, and it's kind of shocking to me that you don't remember.
It's true. It's like you're a visual artist, and I'm like, oh yeah. It's like, oh, you're sober. Oh wow, like that's cool. I am sober. I was sober. But what I was going to say is, you asked me, if I felt like, oh, I got sober, and then that's not fair because I got sober and now I'm having this. But when somebody has to get sober, in like me, I have so much self-hatred and unworthiness that I just already feel like I deserve every bad thing. You know what I mean? So it's like nothing, the challenge, I mean, I've done a lot of work, so it's not like this anymore, but especially in those days, it's like the challenge is like some big blessing comes, and it's like being able to accept that I'm worthy of that blessing. But some cursed thing or some calamity, it's just like, oh, of course this is going to happen to me because I'm a calamity person. You know what I mean? It wasn't,
I do, yeah.
it wasn't like that. Yeah.
So you're a spiritual teacher in addition to all these other things.
Oh my God, that's another thing.
And you teach in the tantric tradition. And I'm curious to know what you know about the yogic view and the tantric view of illness.
Yeah, God, thank you for asking that. Well, you should also say that I teach in the tantric tradition. It's not in the sort of neo-tantric sacred sex tradition, because sometimes that's what people think of when they think of Tantra.
Important to know.
I teach in the Maha-Yoga tradition that is more about consciousness and evolution of consciousness and inner freedom and that kind of thing. And, and when you say yoga also, yoga can get really wrapped up into that racket of ableism. Well, if you just do the right yoga and eat the right things, then you'll never be touched by disease. And I mean, there are even things in the scriptures that say that. It's just like total bullshit and very, very harmful, actually, and not helpful at all when your 25-year-old yoga teacher tells you that, oh, yeah, well, you can just cure your arthritis by doing downward facing dog. And you're like 65 and been working for the post office for 30 years.
Yeah, just push through that downward dog. You'll be fine.
Yeah, it's change your attitude.
Yeah.
So there are really great things that come into Ayurveda and come into some of the Hatha Yoga traditions, those are like the physical practices about how to work with your life force and how to keep yourself healthy and more balanced. For sure. And it's really good for your body if you do it well with good alignment. However, in the actual Maha-Yoga teachings, I think more of just like the teachings about karma, that there's an understanding that when we take this birth, we take with us what are called prarabdha karma, which are these inevitable things that we're going to experience in this lifetime. And that the yoga teaching or the yoga practice is not about avoiding those karmas from happening, but it's rather about fortifying yourself with wisdom and connectedness to spirit to be able to weather those prarabdha karma. Just geek out a tiny bit. So there's 3 kinds of karma. There's sanchita karma. That's like all of your karmas from all of your past lives. Let's say they're all like stored in New Jersey or something.
What a place
in like a warehouse. And then when you're going to take a birth, you have to have some karmas. You have to have a body and a family and be born somewhere and have a general timeline for your life and like major things. Maybe major illnesses, maybe, a cause of death, maybe a time of death and all these things. You have to have those to be born. So those are called prarabdha karmas, like destiny. They are going to happen. And then as you're alive and you're living through your prarabdha karmas, the way that you react to them creates the 3rd kind of karma, which is called kriyaman karma. And so what the Maha-Yoga teachings really have to offer is like how to react to the things that are arising in our karma today in the best way, in the wisest way, in a way that doesn't then create more ripples of suffering, but rather can take them and turn them into fodder for our process of getting free, or take us in a direction where we're going to help others or serve others. It's a tough teaching. It's a lot easier to think, well, if I just, do these practices every day, I won't ever get sick. That's a lot easier thing to believe. Mm-hmm. But I think that this other thing is it's what the teachings really have to offer about this.
Yeah, when I was preparing for this, I also read your interview that you did with Ram Dass in 2005, who had a lot of challenges with his body and he left his body in 2019. But he taught a lot on this very teaching in his own way, also just by virtue of being in the body that he was in. And in that interview, he was talking about really just being in one's body at any given moment. And as you were just explaining that, it's such a powerful and beautiful teaching. And I think it's true for many people who go through trials with their physical body, that they then turn to service and want to help others in similar positions. And it's also not true for people as well, as with anything.
Yeah.
But what would you say to someone who's really struggling with that in this moment and is like, fuck that. I don't feel the move to be of service. I don't feel like I can react even, because I'm stuck in it at this moment in time.
Yeah. Well, it's a grace thing. I mean, it's a thing where, like, when that response comes, it is actually an act of grace. And it's not something that you can force. But also, it's like to really take time. Sometimes you'll hear something like this, and then you feel this pressure that you have to do something right now. But there's just not a time for it. There's a time where you're just fucked. And you can't skip that part by just jumping into, well, I'm going to, now serve everyone. Nowadays, there's a pressure sometimes, especially people that are teachers or coaches or in this world, where they have to very quickly turn whatever their limitation is into part of their branding.
Yes.
Or like someone will be an addict, like an addict yoga teacher, and then they get sober and they are sober for 3 months, and now they're teaching about yoga for sobriety. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
And, not only is that not going to be a great offering, but they're also shortchanging themselves. I mean, that's just a thing for spiritual teachers in general. Nowadays, people they don't want to have a job. They want to just do what they love. And so they go to a weekend workshop and they discover something, and then they decide to just be like a knowledge entrepreneur in that subject without spending the 10,000 hours immersed in it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
the time takes time.
It takes time.
Yeah.
And especially stuff with the body and healing, and you just don't know. You don't know until you know. And that principle is there of service, but you can't rush it. Sometimes you just got to be sick. Sometimes you just got to be recovering.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we're coming to a close, and we have 3 questions that we always ask our guests. If you lived in a world that completely catered to your illness and to having a stoma bag, what would that look like?
I don't know. Maybe like waist-high toilets.
I like that. What an image. Okay. We'll take it on board. And then what's one phrase or saying that you always come back to? I would imagine you have many.
I think it's something in the field of thy will be done. Something in that, something related to that.
And then what's one thing that you do every day to keep yourself creative?
Ooh. I have to say my spiritual practice, but specifically my spiritual practice is about, having a goal of being free. And so whether I'm meditating or doing something else, it's like this check-in of like, how free am I right now? And how am I stuck? And then, if I can, to do a little practice or a lot of practice to get unstuck, I would say.
That's such a good one.
And sometimes that's meditation, sometimes that's dancing, sometimes that's talking to an important person, so many different things.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how many people say dancing. I love it. A lot of people say it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Harshada. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. This is fun. It brought me into a lot of areas that I haven't thought about in some time. Thank you. Keep up the good work. This is really amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. That was our show, So Life Wants You Dead. This episode was made with support from Awakening Healthcare, encouraging and supporting providers and patients to reconnect with their souls. Many thanks to Stephanie Moore Davis and Ruby Shaw. Our illustrations are by Renee Fagan. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave us a review, rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Instagram at SoLifeOnceYouDead, where you can follow along for updates about the show. Thanks so much, and see you next time.